Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to members of the committee. I'm very happy to be in front of you with this legislation. I don't want to make a lot of comment. I've been listening to all the testimony against it and in favor. And I think you have more than one reason why we have to raise minimum island. One of the things I wanted to say, I have all the minimum, all the small business on my heart. I know the pandemic, a lot of this small business being affected, and that's why I put a resolution to cut the curfew on small business. Thank God the governor did it without we doing the resolution. But I understand the issue. I understand why some of the small businesses against this legislation. But I do believe too the minimum wage in Rhode Island, it will help the Rhode Island economic, because more money that this working family make, the more money they're going to be able to spend. They're going to be able to go out to eat. They're going to be able to participate and put back into the communities and back into the economic. But like I said, I don't want to use a lot of your time, because I know we heard everything and anything tonight. And I'm very happy to hear so much passion about this issue. And I hope, we can go through this year and raise the minimum wage in Rhode Island. Thank you for the opportunity. Open to any question.
If you want that. I just wanted to recognize and appreciate many of the improvements that were in the bill that you introduced, Senator Cohen, that I actually think are strongly needed by the workers in the state, and would like to see those move forward as well, particularly as looking at tipped workers and those who are affected by COVID right now and deserve to be adequately paid for the additional burden that is being placed on them for continuing to have to work in an environment that they didn't necessarily sign up for when they took their job. So I want to recognize and value that work, and particularly recognize that once again, we are on the cusp of raising the minimum wage and leaving the tipped minimum wage at $3.89 an hour. We know that tipped workers are absolutely the highest group of people who are affected by sexual harassment claims into the EEOC. These are disproportionately women of color and people of color and women. And we are continuing to create a discrepancy that puts them further at risk. So I understand that there are some people who are concerned about the restaurant industry. The reality is this is one of the few industries in the entire country, are tipped workers, in which we don't require the employer to actually pay them. And that is hugely problematic, because when you are reliant on the person sitting at the table who may or may not be showing up right now, but you're relying on them for their, to make sure you can make rent, you have to act in ways in which you have to deal with a lot of behavior that otherwise would make people very uncomfortable in other working places. And we are just continuing to increase that discrepancy. And further, if you look at the tipped workers during COVID, there's a lot of people talking about the restaurant industry here, but they aren't talking about the workers themselves who have struggled as they filed for UI and PUA to actually show their real wages. And been really compensated appropriately and have struggled enormously to have their bills paid during COVID.
Great. So earlier today, I submitted written testimony addressing 4 of the bills under consideration. The Economic Progress Institute supports Senate Bills 1 and 143 to put Rhode Island on a path to $15 an hour for the minimum wage, as well as the other elements included in SB 143, including increasing the tip to minimum or cash wage and improving enforcement of minimum wage laws. Our preference would be to pass SB 143 since it gets us to $15 faster and is more comprehensive. We see as unnecessary SB 136's call for the formation of the study commission because we already have enough information to make this decision, and the commission is likely only to stall action. And we oppose SB 137, which could create a staggering revenue loss for Rhode Island. In our estimates, starting in the tens and possibly hundreds of millions of dollars per year for this attempt to provide tax credits. I urge you to review our written testimony in this matter, where we detail how this bill would result in such a revenue loss. In terms of the minimum wage in general, I won't repeat all the arguments we have in the written testimony. I just want to highlight a few key points. First, minimum wage workers cannot meet their basic needs and those of their families, as we document in our recent publication, the Rhode Island Standard of Need 2020. We should pay our workers a living wage. Getting on a path to 15 will move us in that direction. Next, raising the minimum wage is good for Rhode Island workers and the Rhode Island economy. Data released just last week by the Economic Policy Institute and the National Employment Law Project shows that getting to $15 per hour will benefit 112,000 Rhode Island workers, more than 1 in 5, who will take home on average an additional $2,900 annually. And these earnings will go back into local communities, helping your district and the state's economy. Raising the wage will also improve equity, disproportionately helping Black and Latinx workers, men and women regardless of race and ethnicity. And in terms of equity, we support eliminating altogether the tip to minimum wage, though raising it is still a good idea that we support. As with minimum wage workers in general, tipped workers are disproportionately women and people of color and would therefore disproportionately benefit from raising and eliminating the tip to minimum wage. And although some tipped workers at high-end restaurants make a good living, most tipped workers do not. Tipped workers are more likely than other workers to live in poverty, and the tip to minimum wage has also been linked to higher rates of sexual harassment and, more recently, harassment of workers over COVID safety protocols. And I really want to emphasize the business case for getting on a path to 15. Low-wage workers rarely have the luxury of saving much of their income, so most additional wages will be recycled back into the Rhode Island economy. This will generate economic activity and jobs for Rhode Island businesses, especially critical now as we seek a speedy recovery from the economic crisis brought on by the coronavirus pandemic. Now, whenever there is an effort to increase the minimum wage, opponents claim that such a move will be disastrous, resulting in massive job loss. However, this simply is not the case. Numerous academic studies and reviews have failed to identify any such outcome. Indeed, one recent path-breaking study examined 138 cases of minimum wage increases in the U.S. between 1979 and 2016, looking at the before and after in each situation and focusing on jobs paying around the minimum wage, and found no evidence of disemployment. Finally, as you know, and as the chart in our written testimony shows, our neighbors are already on a path to 15. Even if the standard of living might be lower in Rhode Island workers will simply cross the border for higher wages, sometimes for less demanding jobs and caring for our youngest and oldest residents. As the gap between our minimum wage and theirs grows, we will lose more and more workers to their businesses. So, in brief, there's no evidence that raising the minimum wage will harm on average Rhode Island businesses, especially with a pathway that provides predictable steps, while there is strong evidence that doing so will help workers, decrease inequities, and boost the local economy. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate Labor Committee, thanks so much for taking the time and braving the new technology. I'm really happy to be here today in support of S1 and S143, the two bills you have in front of you that raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And I just want to say, those of you who've been on this committee know that this is far from the first time that I've testified in support of a $15 an hour minimum wage bill. It's an issue we've been working on at the Rhode Island Working Families Party for many years, since 2017. And when I first started testifying on it, it was a bold proposal. It felt like a new idea. It's far from that anymore. It's now very much a common sense, mainstream idea, part of President Biden's core platform around economic rescue, and one that the vast majority of your constituents, Democrats and Republicans alike, support. I want to say a few things about what we support and the extent to which they're reflected in these bills. First of all, $15 an hour minimum wage, that's the number we've been hearing all night. I just want to stress just how many people that affects. About 1 in 5 Rhode Islanders makes less than $15 an hour now. If we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour over several years, as both of these bills do, the benefits will accrue to something more like 130,000 Rhode Islanders who will get a raise. That's 1 in 4 people who work in Rhode Island. So the effects are truly wide-ranging and a real game changer for so many families. and they're not evenly felt. Low-wage workers are disproportionately people of color. They're disproportionately women. And so raising the minimum wage is a major step toward equity in our workforce. Both of these bills would be a huge improvement for working families, especially for families of color. I want to say that the timeline that we do it on is really important. Families are struggling now. We need a predictable path to 15. We've long supported raising the minimum wage to 15 in several steps. But it is important how quickly we get there. Both Connecticut and Massachusetts have paths to 15 that get their folks there in early 2023. In that respect, S-143 is a stronger bill than S-1 since it gets us to 15 a little bit faster. We also strongly support tying the minimum wage to inflation, to the cost of actual goods and services once it reaches $15 an hour. This is important for a couple of reasons. One, you don't want the actual buying power of low-wage workers to decline once you reach 15, and you want the minimum wage to increase in a predictable way. Many other states have done this. It's included in S-143, and it's super important. We support a minimum wage that's inclusive of all workers. As several other speakers have highlighted tonight, we have a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, which is less than $4 an hour. Even though they earn tips on top of that, the median wage of a tipped worker in Rhode Island before the pandemic, when they were undoubtedly in better shape, was only $12.66. Poverty is higher in these industries, and again, disproportionately women and people of color. So extremely important that we look at raising the tipped minimum wage along with the regular minimum wage. S-143 takes an important step in that direction, although we support eliminating the sub-minimum tipped wage altogether. We'd also support and encourage you all to consider removing the exemption for domestic workers in our minimum wage law. Again, those workers are disproportionately women and people of color. I think you have an opportunity here to move forward a $15 an hour minimum wage bill that really includes all workers and does some major work on inequality in our economy. I want to be clear that we're also opposed to the first three bills, the S-136 and 137, and the resolution. We think those are unnecessary delays. It's very clear what Rhode Island working families need, and it's a really important part of creating a recovery from this economy, from this recession that includes everyone and puts us on strong economic footing going forward. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Chair Chacon and committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to address you tonight, and I thank you for your consideration of these pieces of legislation. I'll be brief. I'm here to express my support for a pathway toward a $15 minimum wage in Rhode Island. Every Rhode Islander deserves fair wages for an honest day's work. And in particular, over the past year, many of the essential workers that have been keeping our state running at great risk to their own health and safety have been earning only minimum wage. Those workers, along with all others, deserve fair wages for honest work, and I do believe that it is time for our state to embark on that pathway toward $15 an hour. I will also note that we are living in an age where income inequality and wealth inequality in our country and our state are the highest that they have been in the last century. Over the last 50 years, the share of national income earned by the top 1% of households has grown from 10.5% of all income to 19% of all income, and the share of people in the bottom 50% has decreased from 21% of all income to 13%. So for our economy, for closing these inequalities, and most importantly, for ensuring that workers are treated with basic fairness, I do believe the time has come for us to put that pathway to $15 an hour into to law in Rhode Island. The final point I'd make, and I know others will speak to as well, is that I do believe it is important and necessary to have a phase-in period so that small businesses that have also struggled during the COVID-19 pandemic have time to adjust. But I believe that a phase-in, if done responsibly, can get us to a $15 an hour minimum wage in Rhode Island in a reasonable period of time and in a way that is truly meaningful for the workers who keep our state running. So it's the right thing to do economically. It's the right thing to do in terms of fairness. And I hope that this is the year that we take this step in Rhode Island. So with that, I thank you for your consideration, Mr. Chair and Senators, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight.
All right. Hello, good evening. I'm Stephanie Geller, Deputy Director at Rhode Island Kids Count, and I want to begin by thanking Chairman Cohen and the members of the committee for allowing me the opportunity to provide testimony. And I also want to thank both Chairman Cohen and Senator Quezada for their leadership on this issue and for introducing Senate Bills 143 and 1. Rhode Island Kids Count supports both bills, as both provide a clear pathway to a $15 minimum wage through incremental increases. Senate Bill 1 accomplishes this in 4 steps by October 1st, 2024, and Senate Bill 143 is slightly faster in 3 steps by July 1st, 2023. So why is this increase needed? Number one, at the current minimum wage of $11.50 an hour, a parent who works 40 hours per week for all 52 weeks of the year with no time off would still only earn about $23,920 a year, which is slightly above the poverty level for a family of 3, but far below the poverty level for a family of 4. So even working full-time every day of the year, you would still be below the poverty level. And families with incomes this low cannot meet their basic needs for important items like rent, food, clothing, health care, and child care, or provide the opportunities that their children need to thrive. An example of the gap is when we look at the cost of housing. In 2019, the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment, including utilities, in Rhode Island was $1,621 a month, and you would have to earn more than $30 per hour, or more than twice the proposal of a $15 minimum wage in order to afford that rent. We support both an increase in the minimum wage and an increase in the earned income tax credit, which we think together will help hardworking families meet their basic needs and put more money into the local economy. I also want to point out the attached graphic that I included along with my written testimony, which is a graph or infographic from the Economic Policy Institute. Because some people think that workers making the minimum wage are teenagers, people working part-time, or living with their parents, and they couldn't be more wrong. 90% of these workers are age 20 or older, 59% are women, 28% are parents, 64% work full-time, and most are the frontline or essential workers we depend on the most during COVID and every day. Increases in minimum wage are needed now more than ever. An increase will help families meet their basic needs, help Black and Hispanic workers who often face greater employment disadvantages due to systemic racism, and will help the frontline and essential workers we all rely on. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Sure, the Biden administration has called for a raising of the minimum wage to $15 an hour and eliminating the tip minimum wage. One of the bills we have in front of us doesn't address the tip minimum wage, and one would raise it gradually to half the tip minimum wage. Given that the majority of tipped workers in this state and in this country are women, and disproportionately women of color living in poverty, there are many of us who have been working for years to eliminate the tip minimum wage, and I'm wondering if you hold a position on that aspect of the minimum wage bills.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I think that you have called attention to a very important inequity that needs to be corrected. I do not believe that it is fair or right that some workers have to work for tips in order to earn a living wage and others do not. And as you know correctly, those professions tend to be predominantly employing women and people of color. And so I would like to see us move, nationally and here in Rhode Island toward parity for all workers. I realize that we're a long way from that today, so as I think you noted, it will take some time. But I do think that's the direction that we should move in, just as a matter of fairness, and also to help prevent the type of harassment and the type of abuse that many workers that work for tips have to put up with in order to earn even a basic living. So I speaking to you on the phone tonight, I can't speak to a particular piece of legislation without reviewing the details, but I would say conceptually at a high level, I do believe that we should move in that direction.
My name is Kathy McCormick, and I am here today urging you to support Bill 1 and Senate Bill 143 to increase minimum wage to $15 an hour. I also would like to mention that the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence has submitted written testimony in support of this legislation. So I'm here today, fortunate enough to be in a good place in my life. I have a good job. I'm a mom with grandchildren, and I have I sit on the board of the Domestic Violence Resource Center in South County. I'm also a member of SOAR, which is a task force with the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence. And I'm here today urging your support because I do remember a less fortunate time in my life. My story is familiar. One of many single parents who have escaped a violent relationship. The relationship that seemed good in the beginning and spiraled out of control fast. I found myself pregnant and scared. Getting out of this relationship was extremely dangerous, and it took over 4 years before I was out and feeling relatively safe. To escape, I moved to a new apartment, got a new job, and left no forwarding addresses. It was my intention to work hard and provide for my son. I was determined to be independent and self-sufficient. After surviving beatings, threats, stalking, and intimidation, I knew I needed to do whatever I had to keep us safe. Unfortunately, I found out firsthand how difficult that would be. I was able to get a good job, or a decent job, bookkeeping, but it paid minimum wage. And although I made every effort to make ends meet, I could not keep my head above water. It seemed almost impossible. If I got a raise, my rent would go up, or, daycare expenses would go up. Many times I had to make the decision do I buy milk or put gas in my car so I can get to work. I had a decent apartment, but it was in a very high crime area. And because I was making minimum wage, that's all I could afford. And my story, unfortunately, is more common than you know. I struggled every day. I never gave up, but my son often went to school hungry. He had sneakers that didn't fit. And was often unable to attend his friends' birthday parties because I couldn't afford anything extra. I went to work in hand-me-downs and tried to look as professional as possible, but it was a struggle. The minimum wage we have now is not a livable wage. Raising it to $15 will make a difference for many people. I know that because it wasn't until I eventually found a decent job that paid me a decent wage, a living wage, that the real change in my life started. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life. I was able to move to a safer neighborhood, and when my son was 8 years old, I bought my first house and moved to a neighborhood with better schools. My son finally had clothes that fit, and he never again went to school hungry. I would never have been able to get out of that third-floor apartment and move to my own home if I had not been able to get a job that paid me a decent wage. That job was enough to help me build my credit and allow me the opportunity to get a mortgage and move to a safer neighborhood. It was life-saving, and I was able to provide a safe and healthy environment for my son. This is all I ever wanted, a chance to make it on my own and live my life. A minimum wage job would never have allowed me that opportunity. It is so necessary to build up families and give them a fair and just wage. When our families can support themselves, the whole community benefits. Thank you for taking the time to hear me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman and committee members. My name is David Valise. I'm the director and lead organizer for the Rhode Island Interfaith Coalition to Reduce Poverty. The Rhode Island Interfaith Coalition to Reduce Poverty strongly supports the passage of Senate Bill 143, which would increase the minimum wage gradually to $15. As a coalition of faith leaders, congregation members, service and advocacy organizations across the state who have come together to fight poverty, we recognize the critical need to raise the minimum wage. Rhode Islanders working full-time earning the current minimum wage don't make enough to meet basic needs. We currently have a system where people need 2 jobs to support their families. As someone who grew up in poverty, I remember my mother working full-time and even sometimes more, and us still not having enough to buy food, pay our rent, and pay utilities. And the impact of that was unmistakable to my well-being and quality of life. The time for inaction on this issue has passed. The pandemic has only worsened the economic instability of poor and working families in Rhode Island. We have a moral imperative to address this inequality and help lift people out of poverty. And to be honest, 15 is hardly enough to do that, but it will be a good first step. We must increase the minimum wage significantly and develop a long-term strategy to achieve a living wage for all Rhode Islanders. Thank you all for your time, and I wish you and all of your families a safe and blessed year.
Hi, my name is Ana Rivera. I'm a Providence, Rhode Island resident and mother of 3 beautiful children, ages 2, 5, 8, and 8. I write to you to request your support to S1 and S143, which would raise the minimum wage from $11.50 an hour to $15 over the next few years. An hourly wage of $11.50 is not enough to cover all the expenses of a single adult, let alone a family of 5. I would know I work as a home care CNA from April 2014 to March 2020, while balancing going to school part-time and being a single mom around that time. As a home care CNA, I was earning $12 an hour and worked on an average of 12 to 30 hours a week. I left my job as a CNA for many reasons. At the start of the pandemic, I realized it would be difficult for my husband and I to figure out a work schedule with no child care available. I also realized I would be exposing myself to COVID-19 for very little pay, and I had to consider if the risk would be worth it. I decided not to return to work, and although it was a difficult financial decision for our family to make, I'm still in a much better position than other women faced during such uncertainties because my husband's income allowed me to financially liberty and choose. Right now, the current rates of child care outbeat the minimum wage. Therefore, many families like mine are forced to make a difficult decision around child care. Becoming a full-time stay-at-home mom was not what I have envisioned for myself, but we saw no other alternative for our family. Many Rhode Islanders live in poverty, surviving paycheck to paycheck, even while working full-time. If it weren't for my husband's income, my family and I would be surely living in poverty. It should not be this way. Because I met my husband, before I met my husband, I was a single mom trying to do the best I could for my daughter. I know from firsthand experience what a financial instability is like and the tolls it takes. The mental and physical exhaustion of working long hours and still feeling like you're not doing enough is all familiar to me. My income as a CNA should have been enough, but it wasn't. It is a disgrace that hard-working families do not have enough for rent, transportation, utilities, or even emergency savings accounts. It is not fair. But just to ensure that all working people earn a livable and dignified wage, I am submitting this testimony today in support of the bill S1 and S143, which would raise the minimum wage in our state to $15 an hour by 2023 or 2024. In doing so, thousands of families across the state would see a much-needed increase in their wages. I urge you to pass this minimum wage increase that would benefit all working people in Rhode Island there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On behalf of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, we are here to support this path to $15 minimum wage, which has been introduced by both Senator Quesada, S1, and Senator Cohen, S143. We feel that this is both these bills provide a responsible, prudent, and predictable path to $15 an hour. We have to look at our neighboring states right now. Right now, we are $2 behind Massachusetts. They went up to $13.50 on January 21, and Connecticut will be going to $13 an hour on August of 21. The prices for products and services are the same in all of these states, yet in Massachusetts, a minimum wage worker right now is earning $80 a week more than a Rhode Island worker. Most of the companies that a lot of these people work in are both profitable and large and can certainly afford it. And if we don't do this, we're going to send a lot of money out of the state instead of keeping the money in our Rhode Island economy. This is critical legislation at this time. And we also like to note that a Fleming poll that was done in March of 2020 shows 71% support for an increase to minimum wage over a period of time. We would also like to go on record as opposing S77, 136, and 137 for the reasons that have been stated earlier. But this is the time to do this, and we commend the earlier statements by the Senate leadership that this is the year for a path to $15 an hour, and enthusiastically support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Bailey Peralta. I am a Brown University student and a policy intern at the Mental Health Association. I am pleased to enthusiastically support Senate Bill number 1 regarding raising the minimum wage, in addition to all other legislation that supports the increase in the minimum wage. That said, I want to talk about mental health, physical health, and the minimum wage. As I'm sure you know, a living wage is just a foundation for creating an environment in which people can live, work, and thrive. Fundamentally, a living wage can help lift people out of poverty and prevent the need to work excessive hours during the week just to stay afloat, because in fact, it's been proven that both physical and mental health outcomes for folks who work 11 hours a day versus those who work 7 to 8 hours a day are markedly worse. Not only that, but poverty disproportionately impacts Black, Indigenous, and people of color, who therefore will be disproportionately impacted by the resulting negative physical and mental health outcomes. Living in a crowded setting, being hungry, having debt, all of these effects are generated because of poverty and low wages, and they all result in higher rates of common mental health disorders such as anxiety and depression, as well as physical conditions like hypertension and cardiovascular disease. Ultimately, establishing a living wage is just one step towards providing the necessary support for poor and impoverished individuals to survive and thrive. All the more reason why it's essential to provide that support and provide the educational and professional opportunities that allow for economic advancement. And that's why raising the minimum wage is essential for the effort of reducing poverty and improving mental and physical health outcomes for members of the Rhode Island community. Thank you.
My name is Bethany Souza Foster, and I represent the Rhode Island chapter of the National Organization for Women. I'm testifying today in support of Senate Bill 1 with amendments for cost of living increases and increases for tipped workers, and in support of Senate Bill 143. We support all efforts to ensure that Rhode Islanders who work can earn a wage that will support their families. These efforts to increase the minimum wage are particularly important for gender equity in Rhode Island, where the typical minimum wage worker is a woman in her 30s with some college education, often raising children. We also support expanding the minimum wage to tipped workers. The median wage for tipped employees in Rhode Island is $12.66, and that includes wages and tips, and poverty is far higher among these employees. Women in particular are more likely to work for tips. The increase will help the more than 87,000 workers in Rhode Island who earn less than $15 an hour and whose situation has become dire as their essential work has gotten more dangerous. It will afford working parents a bit more economic security for their families. It will make Rhode Island more competitive with our neighboring states, Massachusetts and Connecticut, which will both have a minimum wage of $15 in 2023. We urge you to pass Senate Bill 1 with amendments, or Senate Bill 143, which will help lift many Rhode Island workers and families out of a crisis situation and will lend needed support to the state's post-pandemic economic recovery. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cameron Deutsch. I am a Lincoln resident studying political science and law at Clark University. While I am no economist or business owner, I have academic experience in public policy crafting and analysis, and hope that my testimony this evening can provide at least a little bit more insight into the policy debate surrounding the minimum wage. I first want to start by thanking the chair for allowing testimony tonight. I would also like to thank Senate leadership and all of the senators who co-sponsored the legislation today and getting it quickly drafted when a minimum wage increase is so important in rebuilding our economy. While most of my testimony will be in relation to Senate Bill 1, I'm also going to briefly address the wage formula in Bills 77 and 143, as well as the tax credit in 137. I do want to provide a quick caveat that most of the research I am relying on about potential minimum wage changes applies to studies at the federal level and also case studies like in Seattle, because little research has been conducted on a per-state basis. However, the fundamentals of the research, the effects of a minimum wage increase, provide a framework that we can all rely on to implement a higher minimum wage here in Rhode Island. Our current minimum wage is $11.50. While this may appear at first to be suitable, as it is on the higher end of the minimum wage spectrum nationwide, the bigger picture shows that the current failure of the minimum wage to provide a minimum standard of living. A research project by Massachusetts Institute of Technology states that a single adult with no children working 40 hours a week without taking a single workday off could not cover their typical yearly expenses under Rhode Island's current minimum wage. And in fact, the only family that could cover their yearly expenses under those conditions is two adults with no children. By raising the minimum wage to $15, Rhode Island would turn our minimum wage into what it should be, a living wage, allowing many more Rhode Islanders to cover their cost of living. If we were to raise the minimum wage, the question becomes what would happen if this change occurred? The immediate impact would be a pay raise for thousands of workers, ranging from high school and college students trying to afford higher education to the essential workers who have been keeping our economy alive for the last 10 months. This could in turn lift hundreds or even thousands of Rhode Islanders out of poverty and help others rely less on social programs that have been stretched thin during the pandemic, freeing up state revenue for other projects. More workers making $15 would also increase both sales and payroll tax revenue that could be used to help address the deficit crisis we are currently facing in our state. There are three main criticisms to raising the minimum wage. The first being it would cost jobs, the second being businesses would be forced to close, and the third being companies would just raise prices to offset the increased cost of labor. And I'm going to first address the final point first, as it is one of the easiest to refute. While the federal minimum wage has remained stagnant since 2009, dozens of states and cities across the country, including Rhode Island, have raised their minimum wage since then. A large number of giant corporations, including Amazon, Target, Walmart, and others, have also increased their minimum wage practices over time, sometimes even past $15 an hour. And the result is that Americans are actually paying less for their goods now than they were 10 years ago. The Bureau of Economic Analysis has recorded relatively unchanged or decreased prices across the board, from household furniture to computers to clothing. Rhode Islanders and Americans as a whole are not facing increased prices because of increased wages. And a study on the city of Seattle, after it raised its minimum wage to $15 an hour, found extremely similar results when it came to grocery prices. There was no statistically significant increase in the price of groceries 2 years after the policy had been implemented. The first and second criticisms are much more nuanced and subject to other potential state policies. Studies vary. Some conducted by the CEO and other think tanks and academic groups state that there would be small business closures that also lead to the loss of employment, as small and some medium businesses cannot afford to keep staff on payroll. However, other studies, like in the case of Seattle, find much less significant loss in unemployment and in small businesses. And what happens to small businesses is up to what the state of Rhode Island and the General Assembly decides to do. For example, under Senate Bill 137, it would provide tax credits to businesses to help cover the costs of rising wages, giving them much better odds to survive increases in the minimum wage, and may even allow small businesses to better compete with larger ones by keeping stable prices that large businesses can easily afford to keep. These tax credits could be funded by the increased revenue from the sales and payroll taxes, or come from social programs that are spending less as less people need to rely on them due to increased wages. However, due to the fact that the current language allows all businesses, including giants like Amazon and Target, to collect the tax credit, I do not currently support Senate Bill 137 in its current form. However, I do hope research and a potential future bill comes out with a much more targeted credit meant only to aid those who desperately need it and have that implemented in its place. My final comment is in regards to the concept of indexed automatic adjustments to the minimum wage in Senate Bills 77 and 143. This concept is a common one around the world, especially in Europe, and it has also gained popularity in the U.S. with over 18 states implementing a formula that raises their minimum wage automatically annually. This ensures that the purchasing power of the minimum wage stays stable, unlike the federal minimum wage, which so far has stayed the same for the last 11 years, leaving it at risk of falling in purchasing power due to inflation. I support Senate Bill 143 over 1 and 7, as it would ensure that the minimum wage reaches $15 sooner than Senate Bill 1, and ensures that we reach that goal before implementing the formula like in 77. If 1 does advance and 143 does not, I hope an amendment is offered for the bill to implement an automatic adjustment system to the minimum wage after 2024 to ensure that our minimum wage never falls behind like it has in other states and at the federal level. That's all I have. If anyone has any questions, I can try to answer them as best as I can, but I bet there are other people on the line that can answer them more than I can.
Thank you. It's not a question, it's a comment. I appreciate Senator Raptakis' enthusiasm for his legislation. I think we all know what it's like to propose legislation and want to have it heard. There are many facts and inaccuracies in that statement, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I would like to set the record straight on the distinction between the so-called distinction that you were talking about between minimum wage and living wage, because that is actually something we have created politically in this country right now, but it is not what minimum wage started as. And so I'm just going to quote Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is where the birth of the minimum wage began is under his leadership and his administration. He said in 1933, in my inaugural, I laid down the simple proposition that nobody is going to starve in this country. It seems to me equally plain that no business which depends for its existence on paying less than living wages to its workers has any right to continue in this country. By business, I mean the whole of commerce as well as the whole of industry. By workers, I mean all workers, the white-collar class as well as men in overalls. And by living wages, I mean more than a bare subsistence level. I mean the wages of decent living. We do not have a minimum wage that ensures that everybody in this state can keep food on their table or a roof over their head. And until we have that, we don't have a minimum wage that is a living wage. And that was always the intention of the minimum wage. Thank you.